I want to do. God. Okay. Good morning, Professor Tootle. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well this week. But I'm introspective and a little sad. Now, let me go to the sad part first. I'm wearing a shirt today to honor Kathy Noon. I don't think you met Kathy. I'm not sure she made time for us when you were out last in Colorado, but she was Centennial's second mayor. And she was also the head of the Charter Commission. So she and I were two of the 21 elected officials. Bart, you were on the Charter Commission, weren't you?
No, John, I was not on the Charter Commission, but I was on City Council when we authorized the Charter
Ah,
Commission.
that's right. Yeah. Sorry to be confused. There was only 21 of us, and we only met for
Yeah.
like 9 months every week for 9 months. Sorry, not to know, but Bart was integral to the city of Centennial as well. And you can just keep yourself off mute for a second, Bart. Anyway, Professor Tootle, Kathy died this week after 5 years of a vicious battle with cancer, and she was so noble and graceful. She was a really important person in the history of Centennial. Not only because of she was our second mayor for 2 terms, but she was also the head of the Charter Commission. Writing the Constitution for the city that stayed the same. It has not been amended since we did that. Gosh, 20 years ago, I think. So does that mean that the charter is time immemorial and we did such an amazing job, that the 21 elected officials, huge debates, and then the citizens had to vote for it. Overwhelmingly, they did so, but they haven't amended it. We haven't amended it since. So obviously we did an okay job. The reason she's important is, and actually I'm wearing her shirt backwards. On the other side, it just says, Kathy Noon for mayor. And this side, it says Centennials Kathy Noon.
Yeah.
And that is so emblematic of why we formed the city and what it means. It's citizens taking control of their own destiny. And I interviewed Kathy because, as you may superficially know, that I'm writing a book on the history of the founding of the city of Centennial. And so 2 months ago, I wanted to interview. My first interview was of her. I intentionally wanted it to be her. And yes, I knew she may not have long to live. And I wanted to interview her before she died. And I know that sounds crass. I don't know. She was a really important character. Character sounds bad. Really important person. And she said some things to me that I don't know if anyone will. I don't know if her husband knows. I don't know if her best friend knows. I don't know if former city council members know, or people that served on the Charter Commission, because I interviewed and I asked her some pretty good questions. I have like 7 pages of notes. I didn't record it. And the only reason I did is my cell phone battery was kind of dead. I went for a long run before I interviewed her, and we were out in the Centennial Park, and I was going to press record, and it said your phone is about ready to die, and so I can't even prove, except my contemporaneous notes, I guess, and honor, what that conversation was about. So I'll be curious in a year and a half from now when the book gets published what I'll put about her. But my point by all this and setting it is, first, I wanted to honor Kathy Noon today. So I wanted to give her a little shout out on our conversation about how important she is in my life and the founders of the city of Centennial's life, and the Charter Commission and first elected officials, Bart and others, and to the citizens, because she served us with dignity and grace, and she was a special person. She was really worth celebrating. Bart, here's your chance to say something about Kathy if you'd like.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said, John. Kathy was kind of a unique figure in the development of the city. She insisted that we had to include an area of the city, frankly, where she lived, but it was also a great distance from the rest of us. She made us go probably 10 or 15 miles further in one direction than we, had to. But it ended up being the right decision. And she fought for that. And I think, that was important. But she also fought for other things. She was the chair of the Home Rule Charter Commission, and that was a big deal. We created the city, and it was like the largest incorporation that had happened up until then, kind of nationally, that anybody could remember. But we were not in Colorado. You need to be a home rule city to really be able to function properly. And Kathy made sure that we became that. And that was like a huge deal. You know, it was something the city council itself couldn't do. I mean, some of us, you know, behind the scenes, we were all there, but for us to have been involved in it would have been really bad, you know, in my view, anyway. You know, because people talk to me about, oh yeah, you should run for the Home Rule Charter Commission. And I was like, well, that's kind of a cool idea. But if I do that, I'm sort of like taking over the process. And I didn't think that was appropriate. You know, and I think Kathy understood the importance of what she was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really super key.
Yeah,
Can
Bart,
I make a suggestion for both of you right now? Which is that number one, I'd say make sure and get all your notes together from all your conversations. Write down as much as you can now from memory while it's as fresh as possible. The second thing I would say is try to get a statue and try to get either a building at an elementary school or an elementary school named after her, and then put together, go and find out if your local elementary schools still teach local history in third grade. Like, I don't know if many districts still do. And if they do, find a teacher, or you can do it yourself. Say, I'd like to put together a unit on Kathy Noon for your local history curriculum. And it usually involves just like one or two slides and a little bit of
for third grade,
content. Yeah. So these are things that you can do to make sure that her legacy is preserved in a living way. Especially, I think you have a good case if she is one of the primary authors of the Constitution of the city. I feel like that's a pretty strong case for being included in the history education curriculum for your town.
So thank you for that, Professor. Thank you. Bart, is that good for you for now?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Thank you for being here today. I know you didn't know I was going to bring up that topic, but it was fortuitous. So thank you for your positive comments honoring Kathy. So a couple of things that came out of that, Professor, then we're going to transition into some big issues, but a couple more lines on Centennial. I don't know if it's that history is important. I plan on writing a book, but do I plan on being a bestseller? No, there's only 100,000 of us in the city, and I can't imagine more than 100 out of 100,000 would want to buy it. I'm going to try to make it some lessons on citizen determination and responsibility and patriotism and activism and philosophy and human relations. So maybe there'll be a couple hundred other people nationwide that would want to join it. Jake, jump in.
John, you should write that book, because the high school where I teach at, the high school has existed for over 100 years. So it's one of the oldest high schools in the state. One of the history teachers at my high school, who retired about a decade ago, he wrote a history book of the high school. And yes, there's going to be probably fewer than 100,000. There probably is fewer than 100,000 alumni of the high school that are still alive. But I mean, to the community, it is important. And so even if very few people outside of Centennial will ever read your book, it is important to the people of Centennial and Centennial history that you continue and you write it.
Thank you, Jake, for that.
So let me agree with Jake, because I think it's also important to know that some future historian might be looking for information on, charter cities, and you're going to, whether or not your book exists, it needs to exist for that future historian. Like you need to write this book.
You're so kind.
Don't focus on the numbers. Focus on that if you don't write this story, nobody will.
Yeah, and that's the reason I'm going to do it, and partially because, Professor, and this is all setting or context for these other big issues we're going to talk about here in a minute. Much of the history of Centennial is in about 3 to 5 to 7 to 10 people's heads. We were the only ones in the meetings scores of meetings over the 3 years in Colorado Supreme Court and legislative action. There was a very small group of us that met week after week after week for 3 years to form the city. And unless somebody took contemporaneous notes, which they really didn't, I don't think, because I was there, it's all in our heads. And so if somebody doesn't interview and get them to write it down or ask them if they have notes, it's going to be gone forever. It will be a guesswork on the why the city was really founded. Now, there's a ton of newspaper articles at the time, so that could give historians some stuff. But by the way, Bart pointed out that it's the largest city in the history of the United States at time of incorporation. Why was he able to say that? Well, because me, when I was a county commissioner and founder of the city, while we were doing it, I looked through Census Bureau tract data of every city over 100,000 since New York City. I mean, since the founding of our country. I took every single city in America and then went to the census tract when it was incorporated and found out the population of the city at the time it was incorporated. And so far, no statistician or economist or historian or politician, no one's challenged me on that point because I did my work right. But the bottom line is, because somebody anywhere could go, no way, my city was larger than 100,000 when we incorporated in 17 something. And so that original raw data and my interview with Kathy, it kind of makes up history, right? Or maybe there's some buried in notes in our basement, something that from some meeting. But how do we really know what's important, Professor? And then I'll get to some specifics. But for you, clearly it's important for Bart and I and Jake and you have gone, yes, it's important for Centennial. Good job. Or think about it and do that. But is it important outside of our state? Maybe it is the 12th largest city in the state. But yeah, people in Israel don't care about Centennial and never probably will, or Gaza ever. I mean, maybe there'll be some historian, to your point, on charter in one of those
No,
two
but
places. What's important?
It's actually a good transition to what I think your bigger point is, that they should, if I were telling, if somebody were asking, like, what's the solution for the Israeli or the conflicts that are going on between Israel and Gaza and the West Bank, I would say, well, look at the history of Centennial. And if you can get to this point, because the creation of, as far as I know, Centennial has not declared war on its neighbors.
And can't imagine us ever doing so.
That
you might get really angry, by the way.
Yeah, that the people from Denver didn't come and engage in terrorism in order to crush Centennial. In other words, it might seem like the simplest and smallest thing in the world. Oh, we made a city. In a way, it's the key to understanding what is always going to be the most important thing in history, which is how can human beings live with one another in peace and allow for the thriving of both. I think that we diminish this and say, oh, I bet it only has some significance for local history. But in a way, it's the key to understanding Federalist One. How can human beings live by reflection and choice? And what you did is an example of what our system of government is designed to prove, that human beings can live together peacefully. And it's not the smallest thing in the world. It's probably the biggest thing in the world. And if you could wave your magic wand and get all the leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah to follow the example of Bart Miller, we would say that the world has been saved. If we could get them to follow a process that was anywhere close to the process you followed to creating your free, independent, and peaceful entity called Centennial, you would have solved almost every armed conflict in the world.
I didn't know you'd go there, so that just brings up so many other points. Let me not jab back a little bit, because it's a lovely point. Thank you. Greenwood Village, and I don't need to name them by name because we've been peaceful with them for 20 years now. I mean, including friendships and mayors and the cities working together. It truly has been a nice partnership. But they were pretty brutal when we were forming the city. They took $25,000 at times four, $100,000 for a week's worth of work for lobbyists to kill our bill in the state legislature. I mean, that was, how does a group of citizens handle hiring the most powerful legislator just to kill the bill allowing us to vote for the city?
But
They
think
hired
about
a
the
private.
language that you're using right now and how when you say it's brutal and you're killing the bill. But here's what I actually know, that they didn't use actual violence and they didn't kill anybody. And your
Love this.
response to it was not, let's form a terrorist organization and go
Love
attack Greenwood Village. That's
Lovely.
the point.
Lovely. Well, let me give you a little bit more, but besides those language. And by the way, I've tried to make a promise to myself not to use that kind of language because I don't think it's healthy right now with what's going on in society. So I love being called out on that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let me not use those words, but let me say that they did hire a private investigator to dig through our literal trash cans, the five founders, because they were trying to dig up dirt on us to ruin our reputation and our job, so we would back off and not form the city. Now that's a little bit more important because how do I pay the mortgage if all of a sudden I don't have a job? You know, if they can cut off the leader, not cut off, that sounds, if they can
Oh,
hurt
yeah. But this is
financially.
all, like, keeping everything within the realm of dirty politics is still different than murdering people.
Love this.
The
What a
dirtiest
great.
of politics is still non-violent, because
So even though the mayor sent of this neighboring city sent out a letter to the board of directors of the Chamber of Commerce, who you have met, Brian Vogt, he was one other founder, demanding that he be fired, demanding that he be fired. I mean,
Thomas
that's really.
Jefferson wrote anonymous evil and lies about George Washington while he was his Secretary of State. He was organizing the political opposition to literally the founder of the country, while still serving in his government.
And we revere both now.
Worst and hiring private investigators. I mean, the reason Alexander Hamilton was entrapped by people who, a guy actually pimped out his own wife to go and seduce Alexander Hamilton, and then accused him of using public funds to pay off this woman who extorted him after seducing him. It's still not rockets and kidnapping and our founders fully anticipated dirty politics, power, people wanting things, people wanting to preserve their own privileges and use their whatever possible political advantage. All of that was anticipated in our founding, and it's part of the story of America. So I've seen it at this local, state, and national level, from one merchant downtown spreading rumors on social media, it never stops. So all of that looks like failure because we're comparing it to us. It's the broader context of world history and the human experience that makes us see that, in fact, all of those things, while maybe not representing the noblest aspirations of what a human being can be, my old friend Peter Schramm used to always emphasize this point again about Hamilton. Our system is not out to prove that human beings are angels. It's out to prove that we're capable of governing ourselves, that we don't need an overlord telling us what to do. But the standard is not, are human beings angels? They're not. But we are capable of governing ourselves.
This is just lovely stuff. Thank you so much for bringing all this up. I do want to transition into a couple things now, a couple other things. What is your Facebook? It's not a bio, but it's a little quip about people. Mine's interesting, and I'm thinking about changing mine. Mine's it's not interesting at all, actually. It's I'm a son, a husband, a father, a brother, right? And then I'm a, some other stuff. Yours is really simple. It's like 5 words or something. Do you know what it is?
I just looked it up to see what when you asked me, I didn't know, but apparently my bio is just another sinner on a globe of sin.
God, that's your whole bio? I mean, that's what you're putting out to the world, Professor. Your
Yeah.
your
Well,
curriculum vitae boils down to that.
that's what I am. I mean, as far as other human beings are concerned, like that is my essence. That's my, what I guess I could put Presbyterian.
Yeah, but you don't put PhD. You're not trying to put out you're smart, or at least you have a lot of degrees. You're just putting out you're a sinner in a world of sin.
Well,
Are you a pessimist then in a world of sin? That sounds gross, or it sounds
no,
horrible.
but I'm saying, I it's hard to, I don't know, maybe it's because we're getting close to holidays, but thinking about Peter Schramm again. We all turn into dust, and everybody dies, and that's not sad. It is period. And what is it that I'm not any better than anybody else, but I'm not any worse. And I think that's the most important thing, that the most important value that maybe my family and friends instilled in me, is that I am no better than any other person, but I'm also not worse than any other person.
Yeah, I
I'm
love
just
that.
another sinner on a globe of sin, and so are you, and we're all going to die someday, and we're all going to be held account for our sins. And there's an absolute truth that we should be trying to reconcile ourselves to as we go through this life. And the only thing that really matters or transcends time is the love that we put into other people while we're alive. And I say that you should write your book on the history of Centennial, and it will be of permanent value to the world. No matter how, it doesn't really matter if anybody reads it for the next 100 years. If somebody picks it up off of a bookshelf 100 years from now and blows the dust off it, it could contribute. It's something that contributes to civilization in the best sense of the word. This ability for us to live with one another in a complex society where we have people who specialize. Anytime a civilization rises to the level of complexity where you have some kind of specialization, you have to learn how to live in peace with one another, so that we can hopefully develop our better characteristics, and that's all that matters.
So much good stuff here. This is better than I thought. So thank you. Let's keep going on this. I hope this is more insightful than I would have wished. Thank you. So I'm going to get a couple controversial things in here, but just because I'm doing it doesn't mean you have to. I look at, this is just a line or two. I look at the founding of the city of Centennial when you Google it, and up pops Wikipedia and the city's website. And I'm telling you, both are wrong. I look at it and go, that's not even the name of the city. They say that's why it was named. No, I was in all those meetings. I was like one of the key guys determining that. No, that's wrong. So I need to write it down of why we even named it the city of Centennial. And then maybe my co-founders can argue with me, but no one else can because they weren't in the room. Anyway, how I'm not sure what the importance of that truth is, if it's important. If we all die, maybe it wasn't important at all. So now let me ask you a hardball. Ready? That was just context. We're coming up to Christmas, and I'm excited about it this year. Meredith has gone all out. She usually decorates, but this year we've got every single Santa out. I think we have like 185 Santas around our house, by example. And we're celebrating the birth of Christ. Are we celebrating the birth of Christ on that day? Sorry to put a hardball out to you, Professor, but what does history mean? And does truth mean something? Sorry to go from practical to big religion now, and I don't want to make you a sinner on audio tape forever. But is this the birth of Christ? Is this the day that he was born?
Well, no, it's not the day he was born, but
Well, isn't that what everybody celebrates? I've seen it on Facebook.
Well, yeah, we're celebrating the day he was born on the 25th of December because it roughly correlates with, you know, the winter.
With what? With
the
what?
Winter equinox, which was celebrated by pagans in Northern Europe. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but I think,
What does all that mean? Seriously, what's it mean?
Well,
is it a myth
means
or is it a fact?
that,
What are we celebrating?
well, I think I'm celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ because I am a Christian, and certainly within my own religious tradition, what I'm celebrating is the fact that human beings don't have to live with, they don't have to keep doing the wrong thing over and over again, which is
even though they're sinners,
right. But that's kind of the point. You're never free from being a human being. We live in this world and we are imperfect, and we're forced to live in and among in this imperfection that we of flesh that we inhabit. But what is the central lesson is forgiveness, and that you can move on with your life. You don't have to punish yourself forever. This is a message that is the key to, if you don't get there religiously, hopefully you can get there through the help of a good therapist. And I sometimes think you need both. But if you think about Christ's birth and celebrate it as a sort of happy thing, the bookend to it is Christ's death, which is what gives ultimate meaning to his birth. And human beings and the human brain, we respond to stories. You know, you think about, why did God have to give us Jesus Christ? Why did he have to be a man? Why did he have to live this human story? And it's because the human brain responds to stories. And it was important for Christ to go through his entire life. I'm sorry for going so theological here, and then to be on the cross and cry out, "Why have you forsaken me?" So that human beings could have the example of knowing that crying out in pain is not a sin, because Christ is without sin. And thus feeling your feelings and feeling hurt, feeling the bad things that happen to you in life, it is not a sin, and human beings need to know that, and to know that you don't have to live and punish yourself. Accept forgiveness. Accepting forgiveness might be the hardest thing that human beings have to do, right? It's hard to forgive others. It's hard to forgive people who don't deserve it. We want, in some ways we want people to deserve their forgiveness. And we needed an example of forgiving people who don't deserve it. Forgiving ourselves, and and hopefully, obviously, forgiving people who do deserve it. Because of what that does to you as an individual is it frees you from the sins of others. And I sometimes get back to in my favorite quotation of James Weldon Johnson about how he will defend his inner life against all the powers of hell. But one of the most important things about that I would say to defend is the idea that that I can forgive other people and they don't have to deserve it. And that frees me from their sins. It frees me from hurting myself because of how they feel about me. And it is, it might seem strange because he was obviously talking about racial prejudice against Black people. But it's an important lesson for everybody. I mean, if it wasn't important, I don't think it would be central to the life of Christ. It is maybe the most important thing to free yourself and allow yourself to live in peace.
I think it's lovely statements around this time of year. So thank you. And I think that's helpful for the people that are joyous during this time of year, and also for those that aren't so joyous. This is a tough time of year for, I don't know, a significant minority of the population. And so I think those words are helpful for anyone and everyone. Thank you. I don't mean to cut you off, but I have some other topics that I want to twine in here. So just to make sure I understand, you're the historian and a religious historian. We know the
I'm
date.
not a religious historian. I'm a religious person who happens to be a historian.
Two different.
Yeah.
Do we know the date of birth of Christ?
Yeah, I think so. I think people say it was probably in the spring, and I want to say between 3 and 6 AD. I could be off on that, but I mean, we think we know within, of sort of. I've never seen any range outside of 10 years, and outside of
we don't. So we definitely don't know the month and day. Then we don't even know the year for sure.
Not for absolute certain, but I mean, some scholars would say that they have got it narrowed down. But because there's some dispute, and I'm not an expert in the field, I wouldn't feel comfortable narrowing it down.
But it's cool that we celebrate on Christmas Day.
Yeah, because we don't have to celebrate, an event. We're human beings. Like, yeah, we celebrate Juneteenth on Juneteenth, but we don't have to. We celebrated my son's last birthday on the first Saturday after his birthday.
Fair enough. Okay, cool. Now let's talk about something really serious. And you're not giving me the answer that I want, which is why I keep bringing this up conversation after conversation. You kind of bordered on it. It was either last week, I think it was last week, with that military professor, friend of yours, Tom Brasino, Professor Brasino. In war, and I'm familiar with the fog of war, but it seems like in modern world, all these facts, poor people around the world have an audio device and a video device on their phone. Really poor people have a video recorder on their phone. That they talk on their phone to people all the time around the world. But it doesn't seem like we really know what's going on in genocides around the world. So is Russia committing genocide against Ukraine? I don't know. We've said so, or we've seen some videos, but is it genocide, or is it just pretty brutal war? And I actually don't have an opinion on that. I don't know. I haven't seen enough facts. Maybe you have an opinion on that because you've read the right report or the right correspondent that's there. I see all the time now on Facebook that Israel is committing genocide against the people of Gaza. And I think it's more accurate, but I guess it's based off feeling, not fact, that it appears to me that a certain percentage, I don't know how high, but probably a significant percentage, conceivably even a majority, but I don't want to go there. I don't know. It's more accurate to describe that they want to commit genocide against the people that live in Israel. It's in their document, at least among the supporters of Hamas. So it seems to be that's more accurate than what I'm popularizing, seeing. And so on something so important, and there's, by the way, there's other genocides that you know better than I do around the world. It's just in places that don't have oil or strategic significance, or maybe we're not there. There's just horrible things that subcultures and societies have been doing still to this day against each other. How do we know what's worth our tax dollars? Right now, Congress is debating this, as you know. Do we put in money in Ukraine? Do we put in money into Israel? Do we do humanitarian stuff into Gaza? No, we need to protect our own border, darn it. I mean, this is like real world cultural stuff right around Christmas, and people are killing each other all over now. I guess not on our border. It's thankfully. Can you talk to us about understanding history? How do we know what's important? To me, Ukraine seems important. Israel, Gaza seems important. Our border seems important. So Congress is rightfully debating and arguing and dissenting over substantive issues, but are we missing something? Is there something more important going on and we all have our eye off the ball? I guess that's you can take any of these points or questions.
Well, I just want to make sure that I answer your question, because you said I haven't answered it. So ask us the specific. What is the specific question that I have not answered?
But we could have the whole rest of the conversation on it, so maybe we will in a different show. But I would like to. I think, based on a non-historian, gosh, I forget the name of the book, Gladwell's book on Bomber Mafia. What Americans did to the Japanese citizens in Tokyo was tough is not the right word. Hundreds of thousands of people burned to death while they're sleeping in their own homes. They're not combatants in Tokyo, leading up to dropping 2 nuclear weapons on them. Was tough isn't the right. I mean, it is. We're going to knock you out. This war is going to be over, citizens of Japan. Don't mess with America during World War II. We are going to finish this. To me, that storytelling that Gladwell told was so mind-blowing to me. Sure, as a student, I read that we dropped nuclear weapons on Japan, and my dad took me to the New Mexico History Museum there, Alamogordo, I think it was. And I saw the replica of Little Big Man and Thin Boy. So it's not like I'm not unaware of what we did, but the horrors that he describes of burning people jumping into the river, and it wasn't one night, it was a bunch of nights, and how we revered the general that did that and how we disregarded the general that wasn't willing to do that. So my question to you is, precision bombing, it's the whole founding of the Air Force versus the Army, is what Gladwell was storytelling, is that the United States Air Force is leaning towards precision bombing, only take out the narrowest number of people necessary, versus old school Army stuff. No, just wipe out the whole city, just bomb. And that story is in World War II is we made a decision. We're just going to wipe them out. And we're just going to finish this war. It's not worth American boys, men and women, but mostly men, going into Japan and fighting house to house. We ain't going to do that. Or cave to cave. We ain't doing that. And it seems like Israel's made that same decision today. But it seems like the whole world, the United Nations just made U.S. was the only person that vote or country that voted against it. The whole world is saying, Israel, you're doing this wrong. And so I'm kind of confused, not kind of confused. This is really tough stuff. What's the historian say on what the appropriate response is?
Well, I guess I can walk all this backwards. First of all, the vote of the UN does not mean the whole world thinks anything, and the whole world thinking one thing or the other is not in any way indicative of what the truth or the right thing to do is. So I don't have any, the UN, as I think at least one historian put it, is an anti-Semitic debating club, and it's not. It often does seem like that. So I wouldn't put much stock in any particular UN resolutions.
But how do we know the truth?
I did ask this question. So I asked this question last week of Professor Brasino, because I have my answer, but I wanted to hear his answer. but last week I did ask him, like, how do you defeat an idea? And it gets to the question of what is a genocide and what isn't a genocide. So maybe I can handle that along the way.
Thank you.
We reserve the term, or at least I like to keep my terms sort of simple, by referring to a genocide as an attempt to wipe out an ethnic group entirely. And in particular, the purest example of this is Nazi Germany, because they didn't simply want to kill Jews along the way. And if you remember the debates that went on within the German high command, everybody wanted to kill Jews. That we act like there's some sort of like divide between the army and the Nazi party. That was largely a fiction that we made up just so we could reconstruct Germany after the war. And so we had to pretend that that wasn't what happened. But I mean, again, a lot of it is storytelling. We needed to rebuild Germany, so we had to find a story that we could tell about Germany that would allow us to rebuild Germany. And just like,
even if it was in that instance a lie, or at least horribly misleading.
Yeah,
because it gives grace. It gives,
yeah, and not just that, but a lot of the graves, a lot of the mass graves and that we've discovered in the last 20 or 30 years were killings of Jews by the army specifically. So the army, the German army, the regular German army did participate in the Holocaust. But I want to make sure that you understand that there's an important distinction even among the anti-Semites who are committing the Holocaust, because we talk about these German generals and say, oh well, they were opposed to Hitler, and but it's really because Hitler wanted to kill all of the Jews everywhere, and he was making bad military decisions because it was time to kill all Jews everywhere, and he was taking resources away from the army that was causing the German army to lose battles. And the argument was not, should we kill all the Jews or not? It's, should we kill all the Jews now, or should we win the war and then kill all the Jews? And Hitler was like, we need to kill all the Jews now. They were hunting down individual Jews in every country. They were executing a plan to kill every Jew everywhere. And that included a long-term plan to eventually kill all the Jews in the world. And if you want to read a book by, it's old now, but it was called Tomorrow the World by Norm Goda. It had what exactly German plans were for the entire world. And wanting to exterminate an entire ethnic group is what I would consider the purest definition of what a genocide is.
And there's been a bunch of them throughout history.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah, and so Samantha Power wrote another book about other things that are also categorized as genocides, and Armenians in Turkey would be another example of this. And I would say it's the Turkish government. I would say it's important to distinguish between, even within genocides, wanting to kill all of the people within a specific region versus wanting to kill all of the people in the world of this specific ethnicity. But I still feel pretty comfortable saying that if you're engaged, and if you want to keep your definitions pure and start using the term ethnic cleansing, which maybe is more precise for, I'm going to draw a line around a specific area and kill all of the people of a certain ethnicity within that area. Okay, I don't want to. That's not the hill to die on. Or the question I asked Professor Brasino, because I find it to be something that I've found fascinating for years, which is, how do you defeat an idea? Because one of the things that the United States has often had to do is defend an idea against a competing idea. And what puts this question into play is that we are an ideological nation state. There's nothing holding together the United States and now other like-minded countries except for a set of ideals. And when you are a political entity that is based on a set of ideals, that is, I don't even know if it has to be a crisis of your existence, but even a material challenge to your ideals in the form of violence, because it could come via terrorism or straight up military attack. How do you defeat an idea? And that's why I think that essay that we went over with Sherman a few weeks ago is so instructive, because at the end of that essay, he says, I will share with you my last cracker as soon as you say, as soon as you acknowledge the authority of the United States here. But if you're actually facing a threat from someone who wants you to die because of your ideals, and that idea can be, we want Ukraine to continue to exist as a European-oriented people who are honoring a specific vision of what Ukraine is separate from Russia. That's an idea, right? If you talk to Ukrainians about what they're fighting for, it's for the idea of having a Ukrainian country based on Ukrainian history and a Ukrainian future that is distinct from Russia. And what Russia would like to kill is that. Is it a genocide? Well, it is a war of extinction where one side is trying to preserve its identity and another side is trying to kill an idea. What about Israel? Israel is founded on the idea that there should be a Jewish homeland because of the truth of world history that has proven to be true, that when other people start killing Jews, you need a place where Jews can flee to, which is evidenced by the fact that only a small percentage of the people who actually make up the modern Jewish state are descendants of Europeans. Most of them have fled from all over the world. But then you have this other group of people who say, we have this other idea that Israel shouldn't exist. Well, how do you defeat an idea? So that was a question that I posed Professor Bersina last week. And my answer is Sherman's answer, which is I would like to live in peace, and I have a set of ideals. If you won't leave me alone, then I either have to change your mind, or I have to put you in a position to no longer hurt me. And to me, that's the most fair version of what we would call proportionality. I'm not the one who decides if I have to kill you. You are. Because if you are willing to not engage in political violence, well, then you're willing to participate in the conversation. But if you are willing to use violence, if I can stop you from using violence without killing you, I'm happy to do that. But but in essence, you're the one who makes that decision for me, not me.
Sorry to be precise on such a deep subject. So is it, by your definition, you can use economic pressures, you can use political pressures, you
Sure.
can lie about a people or a culture or a nation, you can lie, cheat, steal,
I don't
you
think
do all sorts of horrible stuff, but you can't kill them. You can't take away their ability to lie, steal, and shield to get their way. Is it where's the definition of violence? Because a lot of people, I also saw on this. I'll send you this meme later. It says if you're not supporting Palestine, it's just a meme, but it's in a big group I belong to. I track all sorts of stuff. It says silence is violence. If
Mhm.
you don't come out against Israel, you're complicit. Silence is violence. Not only words are violence, but now I just thought that was a remarkable little statement. Silence is violence. Well,
No,
anyway. Where
violence
is
is violence. Silence is not violence. Violence is violence. Yeah. So ask your, I mean, that's my response to the meme.
right? Thank you.
But
How
what's
do
your
you?
question?
You're in that specific instance, because I think we differ a little bit. I'm more with the general that got kicked out and retired in peace in California, rather than the one that was celebrated and became a cabinet member, the one we all celebrate from World War II, who did the bombing of Tokyo. I want precision bombing. I want to take out. I want to take out the leaders one by one. I want to take out every single. If I was in Israel, I'm not, but I'm not sure I want to raise Atlanta. I'm not sure I want to bomb Japan. I'm not sure I want to level. Now they told them to get out, admittedly, but then they started leveling. And so I'm wondering if there's much of a difference between you and I, or whether there's a cosmic difference between you and I.
I think that book has had an outsized
It
influence on
has.
your,
It has.
because it's a false choice. Our military doctrine, this is something that I'm sure we could have asked Brasino last week, but if he were here, I think he would tell you that American military doctrine has always been about taking out the source of the violence. And that's why I wanted to get, so at the sort of precision level versus terror bombing question, that's the sort of thing that's on the fringe after we accept that if we're just trying to take out a military target, that we target that military thing precisely. So the next question to ask, though, is how do you defeat an idea? And what has to happen in a place, and if it, we don't have to make it about Japan or Israel, we could make it about Nazi Germany. Essentially, you had to say in Nazi Germany and in Japan, one of the lessons we learned is that we can't let people lie about what happened. There can't be this myth and we've done a horrible job, maybe in the United States, of combating the lost cause myth. But the lesson of World War I seemed to be, we're not going to allow you to say that you didn't really lose this war. And I don't know if this is still a thing, but when kids used to wrestle each other to the ground and say "uncle," that meant I give up.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why that the United States adopted unconditional surrender in the case, because if we could have reached a conditional surrender with Germany, we could have reached Britain could have had a conditional surrender with Germany. I mean, that's what we would say is the source of Britain's greatness, of Winston Churchill's claim to be maybe the most important person of the 20th century, is based on the fact that he didn't make peace with Nazi Germany. Because making peace with Nazi Germany would be preserving the evil, right? That's like people who, again, I guess the parallel is people who are calling for a ceasefire now. What you're saying is you're calling for a ceasefire after the invasion and violence has taken place.
And they're saying they're going to do it again, and they're going to keep
Right.
doing it. Yeah.
So again, how do you defeat an idea is our strategy, and I think FDR did a good job of explaining this, is that at the end of this battle, they have to say that they've lost. And until we get to the point where they say that they have lost and that their ideology is a failed and incorrect ideology, we are going to wage this war until that happens. And that's what I'm getting at with this Sherman understanding. You have to say, I've lost, you've won, you're right, I'm wrong. And until we hear those words, this war is going to continue.
So I think we're probably closer than I thought. I'm not sure. I don't even think it's a chasm. I think we're actually pretty darn close. The reason I like that book, that it has an oversized opinion, and it does, is just because no one's talking about it. They're saying like, oh, Israel's bad and they're doing this and they should just. Well, no, what are you talking about? We did it. I mean, when we celebrate World War II and World War II vets, I mean, it was horrible what we did.
Mm-hmm.
It was horrible. We did that, and we stopped the war. Otherwise, we would have had hundreds of thousands of GIs die.
Well, and look at the civilian deaths on Okinawa. I think one of the other things to remember is, and this is sometimes helpful, I think, for explaining this concept to Americans, if Jake's still around.
Hold on, Professor. Remember your thought. You got it? Remember what you're going to say? Jake, I know you are leaving, and you're pretty insightful on these things. If you're still there, is there anything you want to add or a question before you have to hang up? Go back to class?
I don't have to leave yet. I'm just going to skip lunch. I'm working on some stuff, so I'm still here.
Okay. Jake,
you're going to miss your friend.
Jake, can you look up how many American military personnel died in Okinawa versus Japanese military deaths and Okinawa civilian deaths?
Interesting.
Because I think this is going to be instructive for our conversation. And that is, well, I don't know should we have a drum roll while he's feverishly Googling this?
Usually pretty
quick. Or you ask your question finish your question while Jake's looking that up. Yeah.
Well, I think we're closer than when we think, although it's a horrible decisions. But practically speaking, Congress is debating this week, and I don't read the same reports you do, but doesn't seem like they're having thoughtful debate on the role of citizen, the role of countries, the role of ideas. It seems like it's political gotcha because the other side's proposing it or something. It just, the world seems mad to me. There's your answer, and then I'll go to my last question.
Okay, Jake, can you read it to us maybe, and tell us what we have in terms of?
Yeah, so Battle of Okinawa, you've got roughly 12,000 American troops, like in the Army, Navy, and the Marines, that died. Okay, and then there's, other casualties. Total casualties, it's 83,000, so that's mostly wounded. And then Japanese casualties, there are 77,000 Japanese soldiers who die. There's like 30,000 Okinawan conscripts that die. So total deaths of soldiers is about 110,000. And then it is estimated between 40 and 150,000 civilians who die. And a large majority of the civilians' deaths come from mass suicide.
Wow.
Can you now see why I want to point out this disparity? Right, we have 12,000, and the number that I sort of remembered was, because was 12,500. I don't know where I got my number, but so yeah, around 12,000, and then around 100,000 Japanese soldiers, and then mass suicides. And what was the final death toll for civilians in Okinawa?
Between 40 and 150, I think you said.
Yeah, 40 and 150. I think the number that's
150,000. Yeah. And the reason I point that out is that that war is incredibly brutal, and the way to stop that from happening is to get the Japanese to acknowledge that, as Sherman said to the people of Atlanta, begun in error and perpetuated in pride. stop it. You know, you need to stop it. You need to stop this. And thus, when we talk about the deaths that took place in Tokyo that were described in that Malcolm Gladwell book, imagine what would have happened on mainland Japan if the United States had invaded. Taking what happened in Okinawa as an example.
Yeah, so it would have been hundreds of thousands of American GIs.
Yeah, and yeah, go ahead, Jake.
So the planned mainland invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall, the War Department estimated that there would be upwards of 1 million American dead. And then they were estimating that of Japan's population of roughly 70 million, that in order for the island to surrender, they would have to kill minimum 10 million people. And so technically dropping the atomic bomb saved the lives of at least 11 million people.
Yeah. I know this is a tough conversation to have around Christmas.
So here's the other thing I want, how this relates to Israel. I want you to, I want to tie this back to Israel and Ukraine, but also Taiwan, by the way. I want to throw in
Good.
Taiwan. Countries have national sovereignty. For the sake of argument, we're going to pretend that that everyone has the title of president. So the president of Ukraine is in charge of doing what's best for Ukraine. The president of Taiwan is in charge of doing what's best for Taiwan. The president of the United States is in charge of doing what's best for the United States. The purpose of waging a war is not to save the lives of the people you're at war with. That is a logical absurdity. And that I feel like apparently we need to keep reminding people that that Israel is a sovereign nation, and they are in charge of doing what's best for Israel, and that's not a moral judgment, because they do have a representative form of government there. So they're, American, and it's not, this might sound like maybe I'm being harsh towards Israel now, but the United States needs to think about what's best for the United States, and Israel needs to think about what's best for Israel. And when those things overlap, then we should work together. I know that sounds, I don't know, maybe too simple, but it simply is. And it is in the long-term best interest of the United States that Taiwan and Israel and Ukraine survive, because we have an interest in living in a world of peace.
And it's worth our hard-earned tax dollars. And to this, if you were a congressman, it's a no-brainer. You're just going to fund it all.
Yep, absolutely.
And the border's different, but sure, do the border too, because that's a different issue. But if it's necessary politically, of course you do the border.
Yep, absolutely. But I definitely wouldn't tie, I wouldn't, to me, there's nothing wrong with deciding that one thing is a cancer and one thing is a heart attack. We do it all the time. The invasion of Ukraine probably has the greatest need right now. The second to that would probably be Israel. But the long term needs to be China, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, Australia, Malaysia, and Vietnam, believe it or not. So we're not morons. We can do this, right? We can prioritize these things and say this is now this thing that's happening right now is an emergency, and it's saving American lives in the long term for us to allow Ukraine to buy weapons, or mostly buy ammunition now. And there's so much misinformation. I hear every time I talk to a real person, the stuff that they say is so outrageous, because they say, oh, well, it's just going to, you know, graft and it's all going to be stolen. Well, war is waste. I don't know. I mean, at a very basic level, war is waste, because you're creating a bunch of products that instead of adding value to your economy are just going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
So you get no multiplier effect every time you fire that weapon, right? But you know, so it's a false choice, because all war is waste. But once we're in this world of waste, we're actually a little bit unique in that our aid to Ukraine, and Jake can look this up because most of it is being spent in the United States with American military contractors. So it's very strange. And maybe just Google, like, what percentage of Ukrainian aid is spent in the United States. It's some really large percentage of this aid.
Because you're talking, it's artillery shells and self-defense shells. It's Patriot missiles, or
yeah, I mean, it's made up of a lot of different things, and I guess there's some of it that is also in the form of reconstruction, drone training. You know, there's some of that as well, but it is absolutely, yeah, 60% of our aid to Ukraine is stuff that they're buying from us, which is pretty amazing.
it is, and I never
if
thought
they
that
were wasting the other 40%, it would be, which there's no proof that they're wasting the other 40%. But if they were wasting the other 40%, you know, if it was just being stolen, that wouldn't be that far outside of historical norms for theft during warfare. Like, I mean,
I don't want to get us off topic, but what then is your party, my former party? What are Republicans doing on these issues of just not being resolved and firm?
Yeah, they're holding up Ukraine aid, and they're doing.
Why though? What?
They're in order to get a border deal, but they're doing a thing. But their argument is, and this is we're lapsing into maybe a little opinion and a little bit of analysis based on rumor. But I think right now what the Republicans are doing is what the Democrats did with the DREAM Act, which is they don't have anything to run on. So they're not interested in actually solving the problem at the border right now. They want this issue to exist through the election season, and thus they're making outrageous demands at the border, and not always in public. I mean, my impression is that this is all happening behind closed doors, but they're doing this because they don't want to actually solve the border problem. They want to campaign on the border problem next year.
Yeah,
they're holding up Ukraine aid in order to make sure that the I mean, essentially because they're afraid of the sort of, you know, Tucker Carlson, Trump, you know, whatever you're going to call that faction that is exercising a veto power over the narrow House majority. And so, yeah, I think
that's depressing to me, Professor. That kind of rings true and makes sense in our current political system. But it unfortunately seems to resonate.
Hold that loosely, because that's kind of me reading.
Yeah. No, but that resonates. All right. There was 3 or 4 other topics I meant to put under this umbrella: culture, economy, job market. I didn't put it in there, but I mean how people differ over substantive issues, and abortion. And a dear friend of mine on that topic, and this is, let's just make this a small portion, said something that was really remarkable. I thought is that the abortion, in this instance, true friend, and also sincere, um, said that abortion, pro-life on the pro-life side, said this is the civil rights issue of our era, to make sure that we continue the pro-life cause. And I'm wondering how so far, we've actually done a pretty good, mostly good job on this, debating civilly. It's to the states now instead of a one national policy. And to me, as a conservative, I actually like this result. I'll probably support a constitutional amendment in Colorado, like many other states have, to guarantee the right to an abortion. Other states have done some weird stuff. I think Texas is going over the line with this this attorney general trying to prosecute this horrible situation with a woman. But it seems like we're debating it peacefully. I mean, horrible in that instance, and horrible if you believe it's murder that it's still going on in all these states. But do you think we've got this one of the most complex and controversial issues of the last 50 years? Is this sorting out the way it should in America, or is there some other? Are we just playing political games on all this again? Can you give me some insight?
It's one of those issues where it's almost impossible to come up with a clear, bright line of what the right thing to do is. But we understand that within the two poles, that it's that if we do if we do an extreme, that it's wrong. And I have been wrestling with this not just with abortion, but also thinking about when people ask what is the thing that I would advocate if I could wave my magic wand and actually advocate for federal legislation on how to reform higher education in America. Because once you start getting into what you would actually do, what you're trying to preserve is a balance. And how do you actually describe that what we want is the balance? And thus, we can't outlaw either of the extremes, because what we're looking for is to preserve this gradient, which says that to make it less controversial than abortion, make it about higher education.
Yeah, I follow.
I'll make this principle about higher education, which is I would like to preserve academic freedom, which is let professors, pursue the truth. But I would also say that if we have no ideological diversity in higher ed, that is evidence that something is going wrong in higher ed. But what I don't want is affirmative action for conservatives in higher ed.
Right.
The principle I'm trying to preserve is equality, not institutionalized privilege for a protected group. So how do you craft that into? I mean, and again, to make it, we face the same issue when we discuss things dealing with race, because we want to acknowledge that we live in the real world where racists exist. So we do not want to deny the existence that there are people in our society called racists who would like to, do bad things. And thus, what the law is required to do is find something in between that still preserves your freedom of conscience, which says you have the right to be a racist, but you cannot, but somewhere between me thinking about how, being a racist in a closet in my own home versus what I do when I enter the public sphere, that's where the law intervenes. And in each of these issues, I would just say, like, if you're proposing a constitutional amendment, I'd like to see it. Because if you can actually draw this out in language so clear that it would be worthy of being a constitutional amendment, I would say that's great. I want to see the one for race, and I want to see the one for weapons, and I want to see the one for higher ed also.
Higher ed, yeah.
And we end up with this, I would agree that what happened in Texas is horrible, but it's because you've got a bunch of elected judges who don't want to have to, who are in essence taking, and the attorney general, all taking a completely absurd stance, because if they were to tell the truth about their poorly worded legislation, they would all get primaried and lose their jobs. But what's the alternative? Lifetime tenure for judges? Well, people don't like that either, because it means it's very, there is no perfect solution. There just isn't.
So to not totally wrap us up, but we have gone an hour and 20 minutes already. Yikes. Okay. Do you have to leave for another meeting?
No, I just turned in my grades yesterday, so I'm
Hooray.
fancy free.
All A's and A minuses.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So to determine, how do we know what is important now and what is going to be historical? I want to go back to the beginning. How do we, you kind of answered it right at the beginning, and we've woven throughout. How do we know what's important?
Well, I'd say anything, defending anything, what will be important over the long term. We have our heart attacks in society, and we have our cancers. The biggest cancer would be anything that is not dedicated to preserving a civilization based on individual liberty and allowing for human thriving in a peaceful context, in a peaceful world. I think the thing that if you were to ask me, like 1,000 years from now, what will be surprising is that we did not defend our own system. And people will ask us about, the people of the future will say of the United States, why didn't they preserve this amazing thing that they had? Why did they turn on it? That's probably true, for 500 years from now too.
Hopefully not 50.
Yeah, well, I think the sort of funny way of putting it is there's this movie called Idiocracy by Mike Judge, and he said, I didn't mean it was set 500 years in the future, and he's like, I didn't mean for it to be a documentary, and I thought it would take 500 years, not 5. Because the movie Idiocracy, if you haven't seen it,
I don't think I've seen it.
Take some time, go watch Idiocracy before our next show. It came out in Jake posted the link in 2006. So 2011, yeah, I got you. Yeah, and he was like, and there was even a website in 2016 because the president in Idiocracy is this guy named President Camacho, and he shoots off an AR-15 and in Congress and stuff, and there was a website in 2016, and it was, who said it, President Camacho or President Trump?
Oh, fascinating.
because the
Okay.
stuff that Trump was saying was
All right, I gotta
insanely
watch it. All right,
more
I got you.
outrageous than the stuff that President Camacho said. In
Wow. Okay, I'll watch it. Your quote was about cancer. And what? Not cancer is anything not dedicated towards preserving our individual liberty and human thriving in a peaceful context. You didn't mention the heart attack. The same thing, except just quicker.
Well, yeah, I think the things that are heart attacks are how do you treat speakers and professors and students in higher ed? There's an article in a long article in the Economist. I don't think I've ever. I spent an hour reading a
Oh,
magazine,
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On what happened at the New York Times. The what is being revealed about our media institutions now and our institutions of higher ed. It's just coming out. This thing that has been a cancer for the last 40 years is now coming out because of the conflict in Israel. But this is the heart attack is happening now
Gotcha.
because we didn't pay attention to the previous 40 years. Would I say 40? Maybe 50 years. Because it really started in the late 60s, early 70s. And the lack of support for Ukraine, that's a heart attack. I mean, the lack of the fact that we have essentially two candidates for president who nobody wants. Like, we have two people who are one of these two people are probably going to become the next president of the United States, and I don't think I've met well, I shouldn't say that. The vast majority of Americans are not actual political supporters of either one. And I guess the thing that's troubling is that the cancer is becoming a heart attack, in that we have this confluence of anti-liberalism that seems to indicate that we're no longer willing to defend our ideals.
Yeah, that's and I don't think of you as a pessimist at all, but boy, though, that's a pessimistic concern. Yikes.
You just know that I find it really strange that these anti-liberals have no idea that they're saying exactly the same thing. The person who's holding the candlelight vigil for ceasefire while wearing a mask outside the White House, and the Trump supporter, they say exactly the same thing, but they think they hate each other, and that but to me, they're just repeating. I mean, everything they're saying is just the same stuff. It's just because all of their ideas boil down to, I want to preserve my own privileges. I want the people who I like to have power, and the people who I don't like to not have any rights. And I don't know, you can dress it up and say, I'm just a anti-colonialist, or I'm a Trump supporter, but to me, they all sound the same. They're all saying the same thing in essence. The political ideology they're committed to is preserving their own privilege, and wanting to destroy the rights of people who they don't like.
Well, I'm optimistic then that there's people like us still talking to me in a semi-rational way. At least you're rational.
I mean, we just have to have we just need to have someone willing to articulate a common sense story. Again, getting back to the importance of storytelling, who is actually advocating for the national story of the true history of the United States. And you know, I don't know how that can break through to the how that can break through the institutional advantages that Republicans and Democrats have given themselves, but or in elite institutions in media or in education. But somebody has to do it. You know, I feel we've been lucky in that, like, and I've been thinking about this more in the sort of long term. We're really lucky that Eisenhower and Reagan came along, because they are both people who did that. Really came along and said, all right, how about a little common sense? Let's and I don't know that anybody since then has really been able to do that. But I'm not a big Reagan guy for a lot of things, but in the sense of like retelling our national story and applying it to public and civic life,
which is why I am a Reagan guy.
Yeah.
Great storytelling.
Yeah, it was. And you know, the other thing is, I'm kind of think that he doesn't get the credit he deserves for being so open-minded and open-hearted. You know, go and watch like his speech on the value of immigrants.
Yeah, his last speech. It's
a
beautiful speech.
Right. You know, that stuff's important. You know, I know it doesn't please extremists on either side, but what it does is it reminds Americans this is who we are.
Well, and it's positive and optimistic about the human spirit, the human soul, and it's a lovely,
and I don't want it to seem like it is a miracle that our founders discovered that human beings could govern itself, and the great tragedy would be if we threw that away. But think about this incredible possibility that actually it is possible that the world can live in peace. That's amazing. We should be, you know, screaming it from the mountaintops.
What a
delightful message of peace for the season.
I'm going to leave it at that as a good conclusion for our show, but give one bite at the apple for Bart since he's been so patient. Bart, there was so much to hang on to. Anything you want to comment on or critique or compliment, criticize?
No, no, I agree completely with everything you guys are saying. You know, I wish we would have a politician or a group of politicians who would come forward and basically tell the American story, like you guys are saying. We don't have that right now. What we have are, I don't know what we have. I can't even describe it. It's beyond description. I never thought in my lifetime I would see the ridiculousness that I'm seeing. And yeah, it is from both sides of the aisle. You know, I think we're seeing it more from one side of the aisle right now because there's actually, well, there are people campaigning for that party's nomination. You know, clearly they're not going to get it, although they've debated probably more times in history than, I don't know, anybody else who's not even close to getting the nomination. It's really weird. You know, so I really do not have any critiques. You know, I think the three of us need to tell this story to whoever will listen to us. You know, and John, you've got to write the book. Because, you know, getting back to Kathy Noon, I guess there are a couple of other people who were, I don't know, adjacent to the founders of Centennial who have passed away. But Kathy is one of the first key people who has passed away. And, you know, that's pretty, you know, it's kind of a remarkable thing in and of itself. Because she did really embody the spirit of, you know, what we were doing, you know, on a local level. You know, but I think whoever wants to run this country, for God's sakes, we have got to have people who can talk about the history of this country in an intelligent way and an accurate way. And we just don't seem to have that right at the moment. No, I don't know what we have. It's really hard.
We'll keep pushing for it then. And Bart, I appreciate your encouragement, both personally and as a small group, bigger than 3, but yes, as a small group, appreciate your encouragement. Professor, you had a great one line. So as far as I'm concerned, we can say goodbye. But if you'd like to finish with anything else or wish we would have talked about something, you're the star of the show.
I'm good.
All right. Gentlemen, thanks. We'll post this online. It'll be on Spotify and YouTube soon if we want to share it out with any other friends. You came up with some very interesting things today, Professor, in reaction to my premises. So thank you for that. Deep.
Appreciate you guys.
All right.
All right. Have a great day.
See you later.
Yeah.
Oops, I pressed the wrong button, but it's all right.